Hello everyone, I'm Paul Starkey. I've been working with draft animals and rural transport for 40 years, and I'm a visiting senior research fellow at the Museum of English Rural Life at the University of Reading. I'm doing this presentation with Dr. Bertha Mutamburi, who's working at the University of Namibia. Together we're going to provide you with a simplified overview of draft animals in the world to help set the scene for this important conference. So we will look at the historical, geographical and the cultural perspectives, the diverse species, breeds and types of working animals, the diversity of harnessing systems and many operations, the spread of motorization and draft animal technologies during the 20th century, the current world trends in draft animal use and policy support, looking at the comparative advantages and requirements of animal power so that we can help to suggest a strategy to improve policy and ensure a supportive environment for draft animals for many centuries to come, hopefully. So the history, geography and socio-economics of draft animals is clearly complex, and this overview and the following presentation on Africa, because Bertha will follow this up with one which is concentrating on the issues in sub-Saharan Africa, we will be setting the scene for the conference. We will provide numerous examples of the diverse types of draft animals, the many systems of use, with photos from over 100 countries, most of which I've taken by me. We will allude to the past history and the current trends based on our readings, our observations, our international travels. But for deeper, more accurate information concerning our highly simplified observations, there are other experts who are specialized in particular historical periods, animal types, technologies, countries and cultures. So this is an overview, a simplification of complex issues, and it requires your sympathetic understanding, please. And we will be showing many photos briefly. And again, this will require concentration for you to take in the issues and the diversity being portrayed. I won't generally mention the names of the countries, but they are all labeled, and you'll be able to see the different types of animals, actions and activities that are going on. And I know some of you are enthusiasts for horses and donkeys, and so I will be going at a galloping pace, and I hope you can keep up with me for this. Thank you. So exactly where and when the first animals were used is a source of archaeological conjecture. Some of the approximate timelines and locations are set on this table. I won't go into detail, but the main thing is that about 10,000 years ago, cattle were domesticated in the Mesopotamian regions, and very early on they were used for transport and tillage. Then other animals were domesticated in different parts over the coming millennia, and by about 4,000 years ago, most of the main draft animals had already been domesticated, and so their use has been for millennia. Most of the strong domesticated animals were initially used for transport, packing, putting things on the backs of the animals, possibly riding and pulling things. These were the transport operations initially used, and agriculture probably followed for most species, but perhaps not for the cattle and the water buffalo, where the archaeological evidence suggests that agriculture and domestication were very closely interlinked. Between about 5,000 and 2,000 years ago, the use of draft animals had spread throughout most of Asia, through North Africa, through Northeast Africa, and Europe. And then between about 2,000 and 5,000 years ago, pack and riding animals spread across the Sahara, through the Sahel and into sub-Saharan Africa. But Europeans carried wheeled transport and tillage technology to the Americas about 500 years ago, and then to West, Southern, East and Central Africa about 350 to 150 years ago. So within the continents and regions, the spread of draft animal technologies was gradual and is still continuing, particularly areas moving from shifting land cultivation to permanent cultivation. So work animals and their equipment become embedded in the cultural traditions. People identify strongly with the local designs and methods, including decorated carts in many countries, harnessing systems of particular types and particular elaborateness. You'll see the bottom left, you have the Portuguese, a highly carved, painted yoke, very typical, not particularly ergonomically good for the animals, but it's a cultural symbol. And since many of you here in this conference are involved in museums and cultural heritage centres, I'm sure you all appreciate the great cultural importance of the draft animals within society. There are at least 20 types of animals have been used for work. The main animals being the bovids, Bos taurus, Bos indicus, the water buffalo, the equids, the horses, the donkeys and mules, and the camelids, the dromedaries, the Bactrian camels, and the llamas. These photos all show the humpless cattle, Bos taurus. These have been used in Europe for millennia and have subsequently been exported to many other regions of the world. In the center there, you can see the dwarf trypanotauran breeds of West Africa, like the Ndama, and those are also, interestingly, humpless animals. They're Bos taurus. Humped oxen, on the other hand, as shown here, are widely used in Asia and Africa, and also they've been exported to Latin America. And there are many crossbreeds between the Bos taurus and Bos indicus, so many of the modern breeds contain actually genes from both these species. Buffaloes, these are the ones with the sweeping horns, were widely used in Asia for rice cultivation. The ones with curly horns, the dairy buffaloes, were much less widely used, but there have been some uses. The water buffalo is highly associated with rice swamps, and they're very well adapted with their large feet to puddling in rice swamps. But it must be stressed that the vast majority of rice cultivation with animals involves oxen, not buffaloes, simply because there are many, many more cattle in the world than there are buffaloes. Horses, as you all know, are extremely important, and many of you are enthusiasts for the continued use of horses. Here we have the examples of the heavy horses found from Europe, and also some of the lighter horses found elsewhere, including some small ponies. Horses are mainly used for transport operations, well, for riding and for transporting, carting, but they can also be used for cultivation. Donkeys are also mainly used for transport, mainly for packing. They can pull carts, they can be used for tillage, but their main role has been as packing animals. And their ecological zone is fairly limited to drier areas and to highland areas where they're highly valued, but they do not thrive well in humid areas. Mules and hinnies, which are basically crosses between horses and donkeys, are generally considered of high value animals and are mainly employed for transport operations, often by professional transporters, because they are particularly good at transport. They can pull, they can be used for packing, they can also be used for riding and for farming, for tillage, but they're mainly used for professional transport operations. The use of dromedaries and the Bactrian camels and the llamas have been important in specific environments. So the deserts for the, or desert fringes for the camels, the steppes for the Bactrian camel, and the Andes where the llamas are. And they have been mainly used for transport, mainly for pack transport, but camels can pull carts and they can also be used for tillage as well. But their main role has been for transport. Certain species do play important niche roles in highly specific environments, and so these include the bovids, other bovids like the yaks, which are specific to certain areas, the bantang, goats, elephants in particular environments, some cervids like the reindeer, and dogs. Other species, including moose, zebra, and African buffalo, have been trained successfully, but were never widely used. So let me raise one gender issue. In English and in many other languages, the word ox means either a working animal or a castrated male. This is because historically most of the working cattle were castrated males. The same is true in French bœuf and in Spanish bouet. They can be used generically as work animals or castrated animals. But some work oxen are actually non-castrated, they're intact males. And here we can see bulls. If you look closely, you can see the bulls in Honduras, in that lovely Roman mosaic from Cyprus. And in Chad and Nigeria, they particularly prefer the use of bulls. Again, some work oxen are actually females, they're cows. Here, these are all from Europe, and in southern Europe, many of the smallholder farmers use cows. This is also true in Turkey, in North Africa, Indonesia, and Bolivia. And the reason why smallholder farmers use work cows is because they actually do provide a better return. If you have limited feed resources and limited labour, they can provide you with calves and milk, as well as work, manure, and meat. And so that they're better. And here you can see from around the world, different people, these are all cows being used as draft animals. And in many cultures in the world, it has been traditional for men to own and to work with animals of high prestige. And these, depending on the culture, may be horses, mules, camels, or oxen. And often it is women who have been given the responsibility of some pack transport, particularly the use of donkeys. So there's a huge range of saddles, either for packing or for riding, and harnessing systems that link the animals to the implement. And these ancient harnessing systems are actually part of the archaeological evidence used about the origins of draft animal power. Oxen are mainly harnessed with yokes, and there are two main types of yokes for oxen. There's a head or horn yoke, which is tied to the horns, and on the left of this diagram or these photos, you can see examples from different countries in the world using the head yoke. And on the other type of yoke is the withers yoke, which is at the base of the neck, the withers. And on the right, you can see examples from United States and from Portugal and Romania of the withers yokes. And both withers yokes and head yoke can either be single or double. Double is more common. Equids, on the other hand, are usually harnessed with breast bands, which is by far the most common system, or collars. And here we can see from around the world various types of collar and breastband being used, different costs and simplicity involved, from the heavy collars used in Egypt and Europe and the lighter collars used elsewhere, and the breastbands. It is possible to use yokes with equids, but this is very unusual and mainly historic. And you can use bovids with collars, but again, this is really quite rare. Here we see examples of rare harnessing systems from Germany and from UK for the bovids, the oxen. And we've got various examples of yokes for equids. In the photos in the center from Morocco, this is an interesting type. It's called a belly yoke. It goes underneath the animals and allows animals of different species. So it allows the equids to be yoked with a camelid, a camel, or a cow in this case. The bottom left shows a system in Mexico where there is a back yoke which harnesses, keeps the animals together. And in the top right, you can see a very interesting example from Namibia where someone has made a yoke that is suitable for 4 donkeys together, a 4-donkey yoke. There are various systems of swingle trees and eveners that allow 2 or more animals to be hitched together in teams. Here we can see a team of 10 oxen in South Africa, a team of 6 donkeys, also in South Africa, and a team of 3 horses harrowing on the Harold Farm in the United States. Soil, tillage and transport have been and are remaining the main uses of draft animals, but they can also be used for water raising and for crop processing, milling, etc. Other animals may perform work operations for humans, and for example, donkeys can guard small livestock. There can be sheepdogs, guide dogs, messenger pigeons, but these are working animals, but they're not really draft animals, and so we're not really dealing with those here. Some of the simplest operations involve just dragging, and so you can drag something along the ground. It can be a sledge. Here are examples from Madagascar, the Philippines, Namibia and Fiji. And you can drag logs for extracting timber from forests, for example, here in Malawi and also in Romania. Riding and packing have been and remain some of the major uses of equids in particular. So most of the riding and packing does involve the equids, but you can ride oxen. Here's an example from the Dominican Republic, and you can use oxen as pack animals as well as in the example there from Sri Lanka. Carriages, carts and wagons have been used for millennia. They're very important culturally, and they're still very important in many parts of the world. And often in countries where animal power is decreasing, the use of carriages in particular can be important for tourist destinations and tourist sites. In fact, in the photo in the center bottom there, the Seychelles, there the tourists are paying a premium to travel in an ox cart. It's not exactly a beautiful carriage, but it is a cultural heritage thing. And this is something that is worth bearing in mind for the future of animal power. So the main tillage operations include ploughing. Here we show an ard in Western Sahara, a 3-furrow plough in South Africa. There's a ridger here in Chad, time tillage in Senegal, and a disc harrow in Cuba. These are all different types of tillage. For the cultivation of irrigated rice fields, there are 2 main systems. The most common one, which is the photo shown at the top here, involves ploughing, harrowing, and leveling using draft animals, mainly oxen, but sometimes buffaloes. The alternative system, which is illustrated at the bottom from Madagascar and Timor-Leste, shows the way of trampling the rice field. So the animals are taken into the field, they go round and round the field, and they can be oxen or buffaloes, or rarely in this case equids, and they create the same effect without tillage. Planting and weeding become increasingly important as farmers intensify, and the planting and weeding technology, as Bert will explain later, is increasing in Africa. And you can use individual seeders, single row seeders. You can use multi-row seeders if it's a small grain crop. And then between the rows, you can cultivate with the animals using time tillage or a ridger. And we also show here a sprayer being used in Cuba. There are various post-harvest operations and harvesting operations, and include the raising of root crops, the raising of groundnuts, grain harvesting, grass cutting, threshing, and various milling technologies. Some of these are illustrated here. The bottom left, it's a trapiche, a traditional way of crushing sugarcane in Honduras. And animals have been important for irrigating and raising water from wells. The traditional sakia in Egypt, shown on the top right, there is a spiral which turns around and raises the water up, not very deeply, but it's very efficient for irrigating in Egypt. The system in Mauritania there is one of the simplest systems. It's basically the animal pulling up a bucket, or in this case an animal skin, from a deep well, and they just move to the end of the rope, and the water then comes up to the surface. And just to see how deep this well is, the photo in the center shows the camel at the end of its rope. It's just reached the end of its rope, and so the water is then raised up. And therefore the depth of the well is equal to the distance that camel is from the well that you can see in the distance there. Incredible. For most of human history, as you know, there were no fossil fuel motors, and most farming and land transport depended on draft animals and human labour. Therefore, that is why it's so culturally important to almost all countries. But the 19th century changed that with the design, development and manufacture of steam locomotives, traction engines, tractors, motor cars, motorcycles. Draft animals remained important in most regions of the world throughout the 20th century, although in industrialized countries, cars, trucks and buses replaced animal-drawn vehicles, and tractors gradually replaced farm work animals. Tractorization in industrialized countries was associated with increases in farm sizes to justify the investment and to allow economies of scale. Depending on the country, farm size grew through the purchase of land. Small farmers basically went bankrupt, or allocation by the authorities. And so tractorization was associated with many smallholder farmers leaving farming and becoming employees in rural or in urban areas, and that changed the socio-economics of farming and local economies. And I don't think some governments today realize, when they're encouraging tractorization, that the effect this is likely to have on the structure of the farming community. Smallholder tractorization, and when I say smallholder, obviously it depends on the country, how small is small, but basically small family farms. Tractorization was uncommon for most of the 20th century, although from the 1950s, power tillers, two-wheel tractors, were increasingly adopted in rice farming systems in Asia, although it should be stressed that for most of the 20th century, animals were the main source of power in rice fields in Asia. In parallel to the spread of tractors in the industrialized countries, in the 20th century, animal traction was actually expanding in areas in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America and the Pacific, particularly where there had been shifting cultivation and the using of human labour. So animal power was promoted in the 20th century by colonial authorities, by independent governments, by NGOs, and by development projects. And with the adoption of animal power, there was generally an expansion of individual farm sizes. In North America, religious groups, notably the Amish and Mennonites, successfully continued to use animal power throughout the 20th century and steadily increased the total land area farmed by them. I think we're going to hear more about this success story later in the conference. And it is important to take this as how animal power can be used into the 21st century. In Europe, animal power gradually decreased, and it was accelerated by the end of the Soviet Union, but it was retained, animal power was retained or newly adopted in particular niches where the environmental benefits of work animals outweighed the advantages of motorization. And I think we're going to be hearing some examples of these niches where animal power actually has major advantages in modern farming systems. So motors have a strong comparative over animals, particularly for rotary movements. And therefore, milling and pumping with animals is now uncommon. It's very easy to get a simple petrol or diesel motor that can turn the pump. The mechanism required for animals to operate pumps is large and difficult. Motor transport has advantages for moving large quantities of people or goods for long distances, high speeds, and on good road infrastructure. And therefore, there's been a big decline in the use of animal caravans carrying produce. But animal power can be advantageous for low volume, intermittent, short distance transport, and for maneuverability in cramped locations, and for deployment in difficult terrain. And therefore there is a continued use of animals for on-farm transport, for some urban deliveries, for tillage in small fields, and uses in remote areas, including mountainous terrain. So there are 4 trends we can talk about where how people adopt or drop animal power. And these are generalizations, but there's true, and understanding them helps to think about the strategy for the future. So people using human powered technologies and transport will adopt draft animals, provided they're available, adapt to the environment, affordable, profitable, and socially acceptable. People who are using animal power will retain it when it is profitable, socially acceptable, ecologically appropriate, and or when there's no easy alternative, again, provided there's a supportive environment. However, people will stop using draft animals if affordable motorized alternatives are available, profitable, and socially acceptable. But some people and organizations choose draft animals because it is environmentally, socially, or culturally appropriate for sustainable farming or for specialized applications. Since the 1950s, the mainstream media, including television, films, have generally portrayed draft animals as historic, old-fashioned, and associated with poverty and drudgery. It's often considered that supporting draft animal technologies is a U-turn back to the Stone Age, and I've heard that phrase used, sadly, several times. However, draft animals, as you will see from the photographs below, require resources, and the poorest people cannot afford them. So these are people actually pulling implements themselves. And there's an expression in Ethiopia: a woman without a donkey is a donkey. And that's, sad, but one of the truths of that is that if a woman hasn't got a donkey, she may have to carry a donkey burden all by herself. So in my career of 40 years, national and international public sector investment in draft animal research, education, training and promotion has declined markedly. When I started my career, there were lots of institutions and organizations throughout the world that were working on animal power issues. Now, there are few research institutions or universities that are actually engaged in draft animal issues. There are few agricultural ministries anywhere in the world that are actively engaging with draft animal issues. And there's minimal investment in support for draft animals, with a notable exception of the localized work of some animal welfare charities. And I think some of those charities will be with us here today and in the conference. And they are doing very good work, but of course it's very localized. For animal traction, we need an easily accessible supply of suitable and affordable animals. We need available labor to maintain and work with the animals, and that has increasingly become a problem as smaller families. I think in Southern Europe, a lot of the reasons that why people finally had to let their work animals go is because there weren't any children at home to help look after the animals. There was a lack of labor. People need knowledge of training and working practices within the community, and they need affordable nutrition and the availability of animal health care. They also need available harnessing and equipment and its repairs, local artisans. And they needed a supportive environment without fear of theft, obstruction or ridicule. And in fact, fear of theft is quite an important thing these days as animals increase in value, as increasingly easy to steal them and sell their meat. Now, all these factors can come together when animal traction is increasing, making a positive spiral. So once one gets a critical mass of users, there'll be more suppliers of spare parts, there'll be more people assisting the processes, making adoption easier and easier. You get the positive spiral. But the contrary to that is where animal traction is decreasing, there's a vicious circle, making continued use increasingly difficult. As the market declines, as there are fewer people using animals, there aren't many farriers, there aren't many harness makers, the people are no longer selling equipment. It becomes more and more difficult. So based on this, there's the strategy that we're putting forward, which we hope that people will think about. For a supportive environment for draft animals, we need to inform, educate, and influence existing policymakers, the media, and populations. And this may be achieved by having champions, either individuals or organizations. Nelson Mandela was a brilliant champion. He, on one Freedom Day in South Africa, he came into a stadium on a donkey cart, which was really identifying with the users of these things. We need research because we need data and we need indicators to inform policy. We need documents, we need videos, we need resource materials for education and the media. And we need to facilitate the provision of appropriate support services for private, these can be private or public or NGO users, but they must be there. And we need to encourage networking of users, of activists, and heritage institutions. So we basically all have mutual support and reinforcement. And we hope that will be one of the outcomes of this conference, is to improve the networking going on to support animal traction. So thank you very much. Thank you.